What up, everybody? Welcome back to our new lesson on abnormal behavior. Now we're going to talk about models of abnormality. And to do this, the first thing that I want you guys to do is to meditate and analyze on the image of an elephant. I don't know if you're aware of the story of 6 blind men describing an elephant. And it's quite an interesting analogy. So 6 blind men are taken to have an idea for how an elephant is like. Each one of them touch a different part of the elephant, and each one describes the elephant different. One touches the horn, one touches the tail, another one touches the ears, another one touches the belly, and each one have a different ideas, and they start to argue because they all think they're right. In the end, a wise man comes in and tells them, if you combine every idea that each one of you has, you'll be able to better understand what the elephant is like. It's a beautiful analogy because it applies perfectly to this lesson. We're going to talk about models of abnormality, and there are different models. Sometimes people get so ingrained to one model that they believe that's the only model that explains abnormality. If you're doing this, you're like the blind man that is saying the elephant is only like this because this is the only thing that I touched. No. You gotta perceive the whole realm to have a good idea for what abnormality truly is. Different theories can provide different explanations for how we can understand abnormality. So let's go to it. The first one is the most basic, biological. And biological explains that abnormality comes from biological processes, and it flows and it brings it back to perhaps disrupted connections in our brain. It can also be the result of a hormonal increase or a hormonal decrease. It could also be connected to neurotransmitters. So for example, a very low level of testosterone, which is a sex hormone, could also lead to hypoactive sexual disorder when there's a total lack of sexual interest. Testosterone can be given to the person, and before you notice, the problem decreases because it goes back to its normal self, to the normal levels. Neurotransmitters, for example, you can bring it back to schizophrenia. The overproduction of a neurotransmitter called dopamine is strongly connected to schizophrenia. So when medication is given, that is called antipsychotic medication given to reduce the levels of dopamine in a person, before you notice it, the symptoms of schizophrenia substantially decrease. The biological model implies that you need to be trained on a biologically driven, focused education. So you would end up working as a nurse practitioner, you could be working as a psychiatrist or a psychologist. A psychologist is a person that earns a PsyD, which is like a doctoral level degree, and you can prescribe medication. That's an idea for trying to control abnormality from its biological roots. Psychoanalysis, on the other hand, is the oldest one that exists in our field. Psychoanalysis is pretty much through the work of a man that many people in our field don't like. That's Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is not the founder of the field of psychology, but he should be credited as the guy that made psychology popular. Psychology was a field that was solely for research, and this guy took it, used it as a type of, to help him out, develop a type of therapy, and before you notice, this field of psychology that nobody cared about now became very popular, and it was because of the work of Freud. The idea behind psychoanalysis is that each one of us has a hidden, implicit, very, very ingrained self, which is the unconscious. And the reason why we may experience abnormality could be linked to the unconscious. For example, if I have symptoms of severe hysteria, which is like a strong, emotionally driven behavior, but I don't have a real cause, it just started to happen, a psychoanalyst would sit down And in the classic example of psychoanalysis, would just let me talk for whatever comes in my mind through hour-long sessions, extended for many weeks, months, maybe even years, to get to the point where you can find the root of the problem hidden on my level that is outside of my conscious, in my unconsciousness. And we dig and dig and dig and dig until we find it, and we can explore it, we can fulfill it, and move from it. Psychoanalysis today is not used as Freud would use it. Psychoanalysis today is a type of therapy that is still somewhat prevalent in different parts of the world, and not so much in the United States. Because here's going to be like a big criticism on my end for the field. In the United States, mental health services can be somewhat expensive. So typically people have to pay for insurance for their mental health services. Most people working in the field work through insurances, like in the medical community. So when you try to get approval for therapeutic needs, there must be a focus on I don't want to say quick solutions, but solutions that are seen, that are evidence, and are not taking forever, because licensed professional counselor can really charge a lot. So psychoanalysis, we're looking at a type of treatment that is going to take months. It's hard to believe that you're going to have an insurance or you're going to have private pay to offset those long therapeutic sessions. So we need something that is faster. In time, is one of the reasons why psychoanalysis began to lose its popularity in the United States. Also, from a research standpoint, it has not been as scientifically supported as other types of therapy. So in the United States, there's a big growth, not only in the United States, but like around the world, evidence-based treatment. So there must be research behind that shows that it works, so we can then, of course, promote and keep on using it. Psychoanalysis is overall should be credited as the one that made this area in the field popular. Humanistic and existential was especially popular in the 60s and the 70s because there was a big growth in the society for civil rights and finding the best that you could be, fulfilling a personal sense of self, and so on and so on. This is not as popular either in the United States. It's more popular in other parts of the world. For example, I know that in Mexico, they still use Gestalt therapy. So Gestalt therapy implies that a person needs to be facing sometimes somewhat dramatically emotions to try to get the best or try to get rid of the situation. So for example, a very famous technique is the empty chair technique, in which you're gonna sit down in a chair, you're gonna be an empty chair in front of you, and in this empty chair you're supposed to talk to whoever you think made you feel this way. Or you may have those instances when you're being told, imagine yourself being a kid. Going back, you're seeing that younger self of you. Now go out. What would you tell to your younger self? And you're talking about this to the empty chair. That this thought is about confrontation with your emotions, trying to find your sense of existence. On the other hand, you have client-centered. Client-centered. Think of a client-centered as the person that is seeking services knows what's best. So in your role as a counselor or as a therapist is to try to help the person understand and get better on their own. So the idea is that you're bouncing back ideas to the person. You don't tell the person what to do, you don't tell the person how to feel better, but you throw in ideas and you bounce the question so the person figures it out on their own. It can work, but maybe not for very severe psychiatric problems. We'll talk about a little of those later on. But some of these ideas that should be given, some of the credit that should be given, it's about how client-centered type of therapy, for example, took off the word patient and gave in the word client, which is much more prevalent. A patient is a person that is emotionally sick or physically sick, and if we get rid of that label and we say client, the person feels less of a pressure. You're not seeking help, but maybe you're seeking some type of services. They also brought in the idea of sitting, because in psychoanalysis, the patient would be sitting down like that, and the therapist would maybe be on the side or would be behind the person. And that's a very impersonal view. So the idea of client-centered is that you face the person, so now the person is laying down, the person is sitting down, the client, and the therapist is sitting in front or is sitting here right next and then making eye contact if necessary. That's like you're giving a more human treatment to the person. In this way, the client or the patient knows what's best, not the therapist. This idea is still somewhat prevalent in some parts of the United States. I know that in some areas of Asia it's prevalent as well. So it depends, different models of abnormality for different places. The one, however, that is more prevalent in the country, I gave you a reading called You and Your Emotions that is actually all about this. So it's the ABC model of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Most of you go to school to become counselors or therapists who would abide to this type of therapy. This idea is super simple. It's all about managing 3 letters. A stands for antecedents. B stands for beliefs. C stands for consequences. So the idea behind this type of therapy, first from the behavioral standpoint, they got rid of everything on the unconscious and they were focusing on the behavior, specifically what can we do to modify the behavior. Don't try to go into the person's mind, try to go into the person's behavior. So for example, if I have a phobia to snakes, to change my behavior, I need to practice exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is exposing myself to the stimulus, in this case the snake, little by little. So I desensitize to this and I start to feel better and I don't feel as impacted by it, little by little. You're not going to grab a big snake and just throw it like that to the person, you're not going to do that. You're going to little by little approach. I posted a video about that you can see if you want to. And for example, a person has a drinking problem. There's pills that are given to some people that are struggling with alcoholism that would make them feel nauseous as soon as they taste alcohol. The idea is that when you give a negative stimulus, you connect it to the source of the problem, in this case alcohol, going to make the person feel so ill that the person is going to think twice about doing it. That's focusing entirely on the behavior. But when you added the concept of cognitive, it's not only on the actions and the behavior, but you're also going now into the thoughts. So when they added the word cognition, they went back to the thought. The idea is, for example, if you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic, you feel mad, you honk, you curse. This will make us believe that now if we're feeling angry, if we feel angry, it's because the car cuts us off in traffic. But from a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint, in the act and your feeling and your behavior, there's in the middle ground your thought. So antecedent, somebody cut me off in traffic. I may feel mad, that's a consequence. But before that, I have a belief. I have a thought. So what makes me feel mad is not the car, but is my thought about the car. If I can control my thought, then I can control my emotion. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, I rationalize to say, well, maybe the person is going to rush to the hospital. So I make something to control my thought, and before I notice it now, I'm not feeling mad. Consequences refers to how you feel, emotion, and how you act. behavior. This seems very simple, but it actually takes a lot of practice to understand well, and to help a person do better with it. Usually you can see improvement on a person in about 5 to 6 sessions, 5 to 6 therapy sessions. It's a good tool. It's the most prevalent and the most common use, but of course there are criticisms that people are over-relying on CBT too much. But, pros and cons. It is evidence-based on one end, but on the other end, if you're going to find a quick solution, this is one of the best routes that you can go to. It can be quite skilled if the person knows how to use it well, but to first have an idea for how it works, that's what the whole book that I gave you is for. Okay. Which model is correct? Like the elephant, you gotta take a little bit of both, of all of them. You gotta be careful because in the United States, we can be somewhat narrow-minded to perceive things only from the perspective of CBT, and we may sometimes ignore some of the other ones that can give us a lot of info. I had the chance in one of my trips abroad to understand a little bit more about the power of psychoanalysis, like for example in Vienna, where Freud usually worked. Where Freud was from, in Vienna, there's still a lot of psychoanalysts, and they do a wonderful, fantastic job. And you see it in the perspective of the United States. People think here that psychoanalysis is dead, and it's not. It depends just in the public world where you're practicing it. If in the model of the European model of mental health, a person needs services, you're not going to get services right away. You may have to wait in line for a little bit, but by the time that you're given the services, because the government issues and pays for it, then you can stay in those services for as long as you need. In the United States, it's hard for mental health services to be paid or at least offset by the state. And it depends on the state. Like in New Mexico, they treat mental health they have much more support for mental health services in New Mexico and Texas. I was working in the field, I saw cases of kids that were doing bad. Let's just keep it like that. They were doing bad. And still, the system in Texas was saying, no, at this point, we pretty much have to see the kid already trying to kill themselves so we can give them services. At least it was back in the day. It's been a while since then. So it's a criticism that exists out there, and it's a criticism in the United States overall. To wrap it up, not only are those models of therapy, but you also have to understand a little bit of what's outside of other views, other hypotheses, other theories that exist in abnormality. So for example, social cultural. Take into account the culture, take into account the social world. In some cultures, for example, mental health is not taken and not looked sought of. Because say in some families, when you have a mental health problem, who you're going to go consult is going to be your priest or the religious leader. You got to respect that. So it's not working there. The person comes in, it's coming in here hiding a lot of, or building up a lot of emotion, a lot of problems. Well, you got to understand that within the culture, there's a different idea for that. Development, you wouldn't treat the same way an adolescent than you would treat an adult. So taking into account the life stage where the person is in can make a big difference to how you see it. And then you see family systems. Take into account the family situation where the person is. Sometimes a family member worsens a situation, sometimes it betters a situation. Sometimes you need to bring in the family for consultation. Sometimes you really need to separate the person from the family, at least in therapy, to try to get to the bottom of the problem. Elephant, which one is right? It's a combination of all of them. Good lesson, guys. Well done. Good work.